Hi everybody. We're going to talk about the product life cycle. It might take a little while, so you may want to get some popcorn. And finally, here's a summary of what we talked about. The product life cycle is just the idea that products go through some predictable set of stages that mirror what living organisms go through. Product lifecycle tries to capture the interaction between customers and competitors, different businesses, over a period of time. The product lifecycle is a very useful model because a firm's circumstances, their objectives, their strategies change as they progress through these different stages. So here's what the product lifecycle looks like. On the horizontal axis, we have time. On the vertical axis, we have sales. It could be sales in dollars, it could be sales in units. The black curve is an S-shaped curve, and that's the product life cycle. I tried to draw it the best I can. And there's the four different stages: introduction, growth, maturity, and decline. When we look at introduction, we see that sales are slowly increasing and that the red dash line profit is negative. And what might be some products still in the introduction stage? Perhaps electric cars, wearable tech, meal kits. So there are products that have been introduced and are trying to gain a foothold in the marketplace. The product life cycle enters the growth stage when the sales start to take off. There should be an inflection point in the curve as the market starts to grow at an increasing rate. Sales are explosive as the market gets larger and larger. For example, nowadays we might see that streaming, over the top video production is huge right now. Esports is booming. And we see that profits increase rapidly or grow rapidly and peak during the growth stage. Growth, unfortunately for everybody, usually ends and then the sales reach a period of where they level off. We call that maturity. We can see that profit mirrors that. Profit's relatively high, but as over time sales ebb, so does profit. What might be some products or services in maturity? Cell phone service, smartphones. I think penetration is now 91% of all the people who have phones have smartphones. Laptops and tablets. Eventually, sales drop more quickly and the product goes into decline. And this can either be a fairly precipitous drop or it could be a gradual drop. For example, products that might fit this category: DVD and Blu-ray players, desktop computers, especially for consumers, landlines and telephones for landlines. Are malls in decline? Perhaps department stores. It's important to remember that the product life cycle is just a generalization. It's a model. It tries to capture the most important elements. So not every product or type of product that goes through this has this exact shape. Introduction stages can be rapid if it's a great product. Many new types of products never get out of introduction stage. They fail, or they never really make it through growth. Maturity can be a really long time. Hand soap, post-it notes, or it can be relatively short-lived. So again, this is for the manager, the marketing manager, to look at and say, hey, where is my brand relative to my competition, relative to the customers? Where are we, and what are the strategic issues implied by what stage of the product life cycle we are in? The diffusion of innovations is based on the research of Everett Rogers from actually quite a while ago. And it's the idea that different types, profiles, segments of people adopt innovations at different rates and for different reasons. The first group are the innovators. You know these people. They're the ones who wait in front of the store for the brand new Apple product or the brand new Samsung product. They like to adopt new things. It's important to them. It's part of their personality. They're willing to take on risks, but they're a small group. They're only 2.5% of the population. The early adopters see the success of the product with innovators, and they're willing to take on change and risk as long as they have a stronger feeling that it's useful and going to be successful. Early adopters are often influencers and opinion leaders. The early majority has been labeled conservative pragmatists. They want to make sure that it works. They're less comfortable taking large leaps of faith in new technology or new ways to do things. They're more interested in incremental or evolutionary change. The late majority is even more skeptical than the early majority. They need many signs of social proof of other people adopting the new product or the new way to do things before they're willing to go ahead with it. They are very slow to change. Whereas the late majority will change when faced with overwhelming reasons to do so, laggards are those that do not change. They never adopt the new innovation, even though by this time it's not really new anymore. In looking at this normal curve or distribution of potential adopters of a new product, you can see that innovators and early adopters, while really important to get the ball rolling, aren't enough to usually ensure success. It really takes the onset of the early majority for a new type of product to be successful. Bridging the gap between early adopters and early majority has been labeled crossing the chasm by Geoffrey Moore. That many times a company or a type of product will get early adopters but fails because it's unable to attract the early majority. A very important consideration is what's a product when you're using the product lifecycle. We can think about products, if we look below on the screen, as a product hierarchy, and this is a very simple example. Personal computers. There's either laptops or desktops. And then under desktops, there are several different variants or kinds. You have ones designed for gaming, ones for school. You could have business in there also. And then we have an all-in-one where the guts, the CPU and the hard drive and all those internal parts are built basically into a monitor. And underneath the all-in-one in this example, we could have several different brands. I think Apple makes one, and then we have, Dell or HP makes one. And under Dell or HP, we have different models. So you have to specify what is the level of product that you're using. The reason that's important is you want to make sure that the set of products is representative of the market that you're looking at and where you are either have invested in a brand or considering entering that market. So when it's higher in the hierarchy, a product category or a product type, so if we looked at automobiles, if we looked at all automobiles, that's really safe because it includes all different types of vehicles, all different variants, all the different models. It may even include electric versus gas, and we can feel very confident in what we see. The downside to often very broad or high level products is if they're in maturity, especially, it's not going to tell you very much. It's not going to be particularly useful. So, automobiles are in maturity. They're going to be in maturity for quite a while until what happens? Either people stop buying automobiles altogether because there's alternative forms of transportation, or individuals start to buy multiple vehicles. So families own 5 or 6 vehicles. Otherwise, changes in the product life cycle and sales over time for automobiles is really based on market size, on demographics. Usually, if you drop down one level, you look at product type, that can be more interesting and give you more useful data. So if we looked at cars, that might be, or automobiles, that might be trucks. You might classify SUVs, sedans, luxury vehicles. You might put electric as separate, however you want to do it. There's no one way to build a product hierarchy. And there you can gain more insight into what is happening in the marketplace. The risk is, unless there's a lot of brands in there, what's going on is based on only one or two brands or three brands. I mean, if you look at the market for smartphones, iPhone versus Nokia versus LG when they first came out, their individual sales were vastly different. So you wouldn't think that the market's going to be like iPhone or the really short introduction stage because everybody's adopting it. And it wouldn't necessarily be like a company like Nokia, at least in the US, who was a global leader but did very poorly in the US when it came to smartphones. So the rule of thumb is just the more brands, the more variants in the product life cycle, the safer it is. You have to weigh that against how useful is that information. So, for cannabis, hey, we know overall that, cannabis sales, dispensaries, that's a growth market. And it might be interesting to see how quickly it's growing, though it's going to vary by state. But it's probably just as useful for many companies to look at the product type, right? And we went through some of the product types, right? Whether it's flour, whether it's edibles, whether it's tinctures, etc. That might be more useful in understanding what to do than looking at the overall market. So let's look at the introduction stage. That's when a company, and sometimes it can be a couple of companies, come out with new types of products, new to the market, things that nobody has really seen before. They're innovations. First hybrid car, a drone, smartphones, smartwatches, etc. So what we want to look at are what are the key issues during this introduction stage. So what are the key customer issues? First, customers often have little or no knowledge. They don't know anything about it because it's brand new. What is this Airbnb stuff? The company has to educate the customer and create demand for this new type of product. Economists would call it primary demand. We have to build demand for the category, not necessarily for the brand, which would be secondary demand. And, as we saw on the graph where profit's negative during introduction, it's expensive. You have to educate consumers, and if you sell your product through wholesalers and retailers, you have to get them to buy it, stock it, and support it. Your readings mentioned a hierarchy of effects. I just want to quickly go over one that you probably find more often in the literature. It's a little more common. It's not any different. And that's known as AIDA. And it's the idea that consumers have to go through awareness before they can purchase. They have to have some interest, understand the benefits. They have to want to switch to the new way of doing things or the new product. And lastly, they have to take action. Many times there's something new that we plan on getting in the future, but we're going to wait. Why do we wait? Well, what we have now still works. And oftentimes, especially in electronics, or we know when there's going to be more people buying it, the price is going to go down. As you read, there are 5 factors that accelerate the rate of adoption. So imagine you're a cannabis company, either a cultivator and a processor coming out with your own brands, or you run a dispensary. How do you get non-cannabis users to adopt? So these 5 factors may help. So, first of all, how can you communicate compelling benefits? So, the more it's obvious that the new way of doing things, the new product, the innovation is better than the current or older ways, people will adopt. Complexity, you have to make it simple for people. So, simple initial designs reduce switching costs, which means, hey, I have to learn how to do something new. I have to maybe get rid of things I already have. And those are switching costs. They can be mental, they can be emotional, they can be financial. So, how do you make it easier for people with little or no experience to adopt cannabis? Compatibility. The more similar an innovation is to the way we do things now, we might call that evolutionary, incremental, or continuous, the faster people are going to adopt it. The more revolutionary, the more discontinuous it is, the slower, the longer it's going to take because it's so different. And remember, compatibility includes both our behaviors of how we do it, but also our cultural values. So perhaps using cannabis, especially for adult use or recreationally, may be tough for some people because of their current values. So how do you help them change their values, or adjust their values to speed up the rate of adoption? Trialability. The more often we can try something without having to purchase it with no risk, the more likely we're going to adopt it, assuming it does what it's supposed to do. That's why you can go to Costco or Sam's Club and walk around and eat for free, because marketers know that if you get to try it and taste it, you're more likely to buy it. That's an issue in cannabis, right? Because you can't give out samples. So that's something that's tough to be able to communicate. Maybe you can communicate it in your marketing messaging. And the last factor is visibility. So think of social proof. The more we see other people using the product, in this case, using cannabis, using CBD, the more likely we're going to think, what? Hey, there's something to it. So the question is, how do you make CBD and cannabis consumption more conspicuous, more public? Is it swag? Is it giving away bumper stickers and other things? How do you do that? It's easy for products that are public products that people wear, that other people see. But private products are harder to use visibility. In terms of competition, usually there's one company or sometimes several new companies coming out roughly at the same time. And we know from positioning that the dominant, the winner, is the one that's going to be first in the mind of the consumer. And that gives them the advantage of defining the product category, usually around their features and benefits. One issue oftentimes in the introduction stage is that there are multiple technologies. It may not be so much in cannabis, maybe in cultivating perhaps, but I really don't know enough. But, investing in technology is expensive, right? So look where a car is going to go in the next 5-10 years. Is it going to be pure electric, right? There are cars out there with electric with a gas generator. So they still use gas, but it's to drive the electric motor. Hybrids, are they still going to be around? Are they worth continuing there? Are they worth developing? And then there's alternative fuels, natural gas, biodiesel, fuel cell, hydrogen, and some other new technologies. So it's often risky to limit yourself to one new type of technology when the market hasn't decided. But on the other hand, developing technology is really expensive. The key strategic issue is whether a company should go first, be the first mover, the pioneer, or wait and be a fast follower. Let somebody else take on the cost of developing the market. Well, companies that often go first do really well if they make it. Nike, Under Armour, Coca-Cola, GoPro, you can name them all there. They're all leaders. And many times their brand becomes the type of product that everybody talks about. When we have to send something overnight, we have to say FedEx. But We may go to UPS, we may go to the Postal Service or DHL. On the other hand, there are many companies that don't make it. MySpace, right? Facebook came along and blew them away. Apple was a fast follower in the MP3 market with their iPod. Every other maker ahead of them just died. Right? Palm PDA, they're gone. Nokia never did well in the US. Osborne Computer, they invented the first laptop. Probably nobody has even heard of them. So what's the answer? It makes sense to go first if you can establish a sustainable competitive advantage. Something that gives you an advantage in the marketplace. And if you kind of think of this as a race to growth and up through maturity, if going first gives you a head start where you're confident that you're going to win the race, you can beat Usain Bolt, then it makes sense oftentimes to go first, because as you go first, you become the dominant brand. You have your choice of positioning, you have your choice of distribution outlets. You get a head start on the experience curve. In other words, as you produce and manufacture more things, you can drive your costs down. So there are some real benefits to going first. But the other hand, if you don't have such an advantage, or you anticipate your competition coming in is going to be really strong, then you might want to wait. All right. So if you don't have a sustainable competitive advantage, you don't have the funding, then wait. Many successful firms wait. Apple often waits. All right. They don't always jump in first. About 10 years ago, Geoffrey Moore popularized the phrase crossing the chasm. And what it is as you go through the product life cycle and you capture innovators and early adopters, many times companies had problems getting the early majority, those skeptical pragmatists or conservative pragmatists, to convert over. And then the company failed, or the type of product failed. One example would be 3D televisions. They got heavily promoted. People certainly bought them. They probably made it through introduction, but they never made it mainstream. So his advice for crossing the chasm is pretty simple. First of all, it's build a whole product. That means have all the features, all the augmented benefits. You can think about MP3 players. There was 5 or 6 different companies in that market. It was still an introduction stage, probably hadn't really hit growth. Probably wasn't going to until Apple came along with the iPod. And it wasn't that the iPod was really the whole product, it was that they developed iTunes and found a way for older people, less technologically savvy, people who didn't want to risk getting caught for downloading music illegally, gave them the full package that they needed. And that's when iPods took off. Do a really good job at segmentation, targeting, positioning. Find the best potential segments. Make sure you position the brand for the skeptical early majority, not the early adopters or the innovators. Price your product in a way that it competes with the existing options people have. You need to make it attractive financially to people. And then finally, put the product where the early adopters are going to find it. And those are his keys for crossing the chasm. Well, we said earlier that growth is characterized by increasing sales at an increasing rate. The first and second derivative are positive. And why does it explode so fast? Because you have first-time buyers and you have repeat buyers who are coming back to buy more often. And so, of course, that's going to attract competition. I mean, just like the cannabis market, its growth has been really solid, and it hasn't even opened up all the markets because there's many states where cannabis is not legal of any form. It's not legal, and there's going to be a large rush of competitors wanting to get into the market. And let's say Massachusetts versus California, but in many cases, demand is greater than supply. Everybody wants some. The early majority is there. They're buying. Some of the late majority is buying. And so, it's companies can lose market share, their percentage of the product, but because the market is increasing so quickly, their sales are still going to increase. So for many companies, it's a really good time. So, however, with all this growth and competition, companies often have to reinvest their profits into the business, right? They have to grow their business. So they have to expand product lines, they're increasing distribution, they need to heavily promote their products, spend, a lot of marketing money on marketing communications. And so while their profits are strong, many times they have negative cash flow because they're reinvesting the money back in the business. And typically, the needs for growing your business are more immediate than the money that you have coming in. So you end up having to borrow sometimes or borrow internally from the corporation. To better understand the strategic issues during growth, we need to look at the market shakeout. And what that is when the market transitions to maturity. And not overnight, but relatively, in some product life cycles, supplies, relatively quickly becomes greater than demand. There's more production capacity from the marketers than there is demand. And that's a pretty good tip when production capacity or potential is greater than demand, that the onset of maturity is nearby. So what happens? Firms can't sustain their sales. So what is their response usually? Price cutting, promotions, more marketing, things that eat into profits. And the upshot is that the market really can't support all the businesses. So firms leave. They go out of business. They leave on their own. Neiman Marcus, bankrupt. Lord and Taylor. Firms will merge or partner to try to survive. Kmart and Sears partnered a while ago. They're probably not going to make it. Stronger companies will be able to acquire the weaker companies. So there's a whole shakeout, and I guess the idea is, the weaker companies will fall by the side or be absorbed. The stronger companies will remain and actually have a chance to increase their domination. So what's the growth stage's strategic issue? The market shakeout's coming. You need to survive or prosper. The best way to do that is through good marketing strategy. Segmentation, targeting the appropriate segments where you can be successful and be number one or number two in the marketplace with effective positioning, and then branding and the rest of your marketing actions. This is what you need to do. You can't sell to everybody. Pick the segments that you can be dominant in and that you think are going to survive and prosper once the market transitions to growth. And if you're in a strong financial position during the shakeout or right after the shakeout and maturity, you're going to be able to acquire or take over your competitors, and more importantly, acquire their customers. The market transitions to maturity because there aren't a lot of new buyers coming into the market. Most of the sales are replacement sales. Whatever new buyers are coming in, there's older buyers leaving. And by this time, having gone through the market shakeout, market segments are pretty well formed. Customers are experienced. They know what they want. Marketers have done a good job in innovating and helping push consumers into different segments. And everybody left is pretty strong. They survived a tumultuous time in the marketplace. So after a bloodbath, firms want to stop fighting. They want to focus on their profits. Just going back a few years, but Verizon and AT&T used to compete heavily. Then they stopped. And most of their programs and pricing are pretty similar, and certainly they advertise, and they're more likely to focus their attention on T-Mobile, who's trying to be a disruptor. But it makes more sense right now in maturity for AT&T and Verizon not to really compete head on, because they're going to dig in their heels if they feel like there's a chance they might lose some customers, and focus on retaining who they have. So oftentimes there's a reduction in direct competition. During maturity, firms have a positive cash flow. They have a loyal customer base that's they're able to retain and perhaps even grow a little bit if the market's growing, and they don't have to spend as much money on marketing. And they've had a lot of experience in manufacturing and promoting and delivering their products, so there's a good chance they've lowered their costs. So brands in this period or this time in the product life cycle are called cash cows because they give off the milk that you need for investing in new products. But they provide enough revenue and profit that you can take the money out of the business and use for whatever you want. Tide's been number one in laundry detergents since the 1940s. So it's a huge brand for Procter & Gamble. Now, there's always a chance there's new companies that can come in. So you just can't sit back and enjoy maturity. Xbox came in, when Sony and the PS2 had the market tied up. And then Nintendo came out with Wii and Switch and took sales away from Xbox and Sony. Aldi's a relatively new competitor in the grocery industry. And even before that, you had all of a sudden Walmart and Target and mass merchandisers getting into the grocery industry. And even at the bottom, Microsoft keeps trying to enter into the phone market, and that's their new Duo phone. So just because you're in maturity doesn't mean there's going to be a lack of competition. There's always a threat of new companies coming in. Also, you still have to increase sales and profits. There's always pressure on companies to improve the bottom line. So really, the key strategic issue during maturity is what can we do to increase profits, increase sales, when we really can't anticipate new customers coming into the marketplace so much that our whole customer base is going to grow without us having to really do anything like we did in growth. The product market growth matrix, also known as the Ansoff matrix in management, is one way to think about how to develop growth strategies. And as you look at it, we can see that there are 4 basic strategies. But what the matrix does is look at existing products or brands that you have and the potentially new products or brands you could come out with. And then it crosses that with existing markets, or you can think about your existing customers, and then also new markets or new customers. And so there are 4 strategies. So first we're going to look at market penetration. So market penetration is getting more sales from your existing customers with your existing products or brands. So how can we get more people to buy? And oftentimes the answer is, hey, maybe we change our pricing, we can lower our price, we'll do more marketing, we'll augment our product, we'll develop a loyalty program. So there's a lot of features or things that you can do. The problem is when you gain new customers, all right, they're coming at the expense of a competitor. And if we assume that they're fairly strong because they've made it through maturity, are able to come into the market during the period of maturity, they're likely to respond. And so you're back to the market shakeout in some sense that gaining the customers is going to come at the cost of decreased profitability. So when does it make sense to start a fight? One, maybe there's some smaller survivors from the transition from growth to maturity that you can attack who are unlikely to respond. Or if you're going after a competent competitor, make sure you have the stomach and the resources to outlast them. There are some other options though. So why should we drink wine, milk, take aspirin, take CBD, right? So one of the ways to increase sales is find new uses or benefits for your brand. What's the biggest issue keeping sales of champagne from increasing in the United States? It's the fact that we only drink champagne during special occasions. So another strategy is try to increase the usage rate or the occasions for when we use a particular type of product or brand. If you're older like me, you know that orange juice used to be just for breakfast. The Orange Growers Association was able to market it in a way that now we can drink orange juice any time of the day. Gatorade was first developed just for after workouts. Now there's Gatorade to take before you work out, during your workout, after your workout, and socially. So they've increased the usage rate or occasions dramatically. Fast food restaurants get more sales by selling more. Think of beverages and the sizes. Back when, a long time ago, beverages came in 12 ounces. Now it's 20, 24 or more. You can get 64 ounces at 7-Eleven. So convincing people or finding ways to get people to buy more, consume more, is another strategy to get more sales from existing markets. Product development is developing new products for existing customers or markets. And it's probably the most common strategy used by companies during maturity. Dove is a great example. From soap to all sorts of health and beauty products. Think about a cereal aisle in a grocery store. It's not really a lot of new companies or even really new real types of cereal. It's more varieties. Competitors are fighting for shelf space. The more shelf space they have, the less shelf space for their competitors. Market development is simply selling existing products in new markets. The most common form of market development is geographic expansion. That's what's going on in cannabis as more and more states legalize medical and adult use cannabis. And by the way, Walmart started in rural areas where they had less competition and could overwhelm smaller competitors, and then slowly moved into suburban and urban areas once they had built their business up. So what do these products all have in common? A Jeep, a Hummer, the internet, GPS, global positioning system. Well, they happen to be all developed by the Department of Defense. So another way to think about market development is that there are different types of markets. Consumers, we could say medical with cannabis, CBD, and recreational. Government, business. So it isn't always just geographic expansion, but many times products will have an application for a different market in the sense of types of customers. Before we move on to decline, it's important to remember that while the product life cycle as we graph it represents multiple companies and even more brands, all kind of clumped together, especially if we're looking across years into a single line, it doesn't mean that individual companies and brands can't do really well. And at the same thing that individual companies and brands can do very poorly. So just because you're in maturity, it doesn't mean that you can't increase sales and profits. While sales overall are flat. Now, decline occurs because new product types enter the market. There are new product life cycles, so to speak, and often these new products are offering better or new benefits that the existing products can't. So they go into decline. So really, the strategic issue becomes, hey, what's the best way to get out of the marketplace? The simplest way is to exit or divest. Sell off everything, have a tag sale, fire sale, and get out. IBM has done that actually twice. They got rid of their personal computer lines and sold them to the company that was making them in China for them. And then they stopped really selling hardware, computer hardware, and now they sell solution and really data analytics and software. Sometimes you can't always just get out of a market. Sometimes it may be profitable. There are enduring pockets of demand. You can't just shut down operations because of contracts, legal obligations, or you need to make certain products, for the overall positioning of your company. You have iconic brands. So what do you do then? Oftentimes companies will try to use a harvest or a milk strategy. So what this means is, you harvest the fruit, you milk the situation for everything you can get, and you optimize short-term profits. So you raise prices, you cut expenses dramatically, and so you make people pay. They're for these products that don't have a lot of potential for you anymore. You're winding them down. And you can often earn a small but steady profit. The hardest thing about using a harvest and milk strategy, especially if your competitors are not getting out of the market, is that they'll find out, and in business to business, they'll tell everybody. And nowadays on social media, everybody will find out. Then nobody wants to buy from you because they know you're getting out of the market. So they'll often switch. So oftentimes companies will start with a harvest or milk strategy, and then they'll end up in an exit or divest strategy. The classic business strategy based on the product life cycle is, hey, get to maturity as the number one or number two market leader in terms of sales. So that means during the introduction stage, should I go first or wait? Go first. Should I worry about profits during growth? No, we want market share. We want sales. And when we get to maturity and have this long period of maturity where have a cash cow, where by producing a lot and selling a lot, we've lowered our expenses, we'll make up all the lost profit. And we'll be the Coca-Cola, we'll be the Procter and Gamble's, we'll be the brands that are iconic, that have these cash cows that rule forever. And with the cash from the cash cows, we're able to sustain the growth of new products through introduction and growth without making a profit. And that's been the strategy for a long time. But there is a flaw. The flaw is an assumption. It's the assumption that there will be a long period of maturity, that there will be a long period of time for you to earn the profit that you missed during the introduction and growth and add more profit to enhance and develop new products. Because what's happening? New product types, new things are coming out all the time and offering new or better benefits. And you just can't count on a long period of maturity, which means that, the strategy is that during the growth period, pretty early, assuming you cross the chasm, you have to decide whether or not you're going to stay in for maturity. If the answer is no, then you have to be profitable during growth, and then you sell your product. You sell the brand, or you disband before the market shakeout. And you take that income that you did earn, and hopefully you've been reinvesting that into developing the next generation of products. Or you make the decision to stick in there and go through maturity. And one of the companies that pioneered this strategy is 3M. Now 3M makes mainly industrial abrasives and chemicals and everything. And so if there's new technology coming along, or even if they have the new technology, they're going to go ahead and shut it down and develop the new products and stuff before their competition can. But they also make post-it notes. They invented them. And so they've obviously stuck with that through maturity. And it's kind of funny thinking about with all the technology we have that post-it notes are still in use today.